All right, well, I'm excited to be here today and meet you. And why don't you go ahead for the camera and for the folks that are following me, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself first of all?
Okay. Hi, my name is Hezekiah Watkins. I live in Jackson, Mississippi, and I'm 73 years of age.
All right. And you have quite the story I found out yesterday. And so before we even start with your story, tell me what a freedom rider is.
Well, a freedom rider is one who was riding the buses, who was coming to Alabama, who was on the way to Mississippi and other southern states. They was called the Freedom Rides once, and they were just called the Riders. Then later on, they became the Freedom Riders, and I think that name stuck with them and is still with them today.
Okay. But what is a freedom rider? What's the whole story?
A person who was riding the buses for a change.
Okay.
They want to make a change within those southern states who still was practicing a lot of racism, a lot of segregationists, and they wanted to change that.
Okay. Okay, great. And your story, this is what I'm waiting to share with everyone. If you could please tell me a little bit about what happened to you and how you became a freedom rider and that type of sort. That would be great.
Okay. My first arrest, I really don't consider myself a freedom rider on that first arrest.
Okay.
I was at the Greyhound bus station here in Jackson, being nosy, somewhat curious about what was going on.
Okay.
I heard that the Freedom Riders was going to be in Jackson, and I wanted to go down and just take a look at them to see what they look like, talk like, walk like, the whole 9 yards. I wanted to know.
How old were you?
I was 13 at the
okay,
time,
okay.
yes. And I wanted to know more about the Freedom Riders. And I went, not, once again, not as a freedom rider, but as a onlooker being curious.
Okay.
So got there and not knowing, but the Freedom Riders had already been arrested and taken away. And my friend and I, we walked the sidewalk in front of the bus station looking for the Freedom Riders, and we couldn't find them.
Okay.
As a joke, my friend pushed me inside of the Greyhound bus station. After being pushed inside, a police officer detained me and asked why was I inside. And I politely told him my friend on the outside pushed me in.
Okay.
And he didn't believe me. He caught me by my wrist and led me outside and said, "Where?" I looked to my left, looked to my right, and he was nowhere to be found. And he took me back inside of the station, put me in a chair, and asked me 2 questions. Number 1, your name, and number 2, your birthplace. I gave him my name and gave him my birthplace, which was Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And once I gave him my birthplace, I was automatically assumed to be a freedom rider. But if I had known by me saying Wisconsin, I would have very easily said Mississippi, knowing that that would have gotten me a trip back home.
Right.
Yeah. So I was arrested and taken to the state prison. And not only being taken to the state prison, I was put on death row. And being from a country town like Jackson, being in a close-knit community, didn't know anything about the procedure of jail.
Okay.
And I was just at a low in terms of trying to figure out what was happening to me. I was more worried about what my mother was going to do to me than anything else.
Right, being 13.
Exactly. And away from home.
Right.
Like I wasn't supposed to be.
Right.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then so what happened? So you finally got released.
Got released, yeah.
And so you were telling me a story about your mom being really upset with you. And can you take the story from there and how it moved all the way up until approximately today?
Well, my mom was looking for me and could not find me. They had different search groups out looking, and one day someone, I'm not sure who uh, called her and told her to come to the jail,
Wow.
and not to pick me up. They just said come to the jail.
Right.
And since they had been searching for me for several days, my mom thought she was going to the jail to identify my remains.
Right.
And but after she got there and spotted me, it was a big reunion, tearful reunion. And I can recall, like it was yesterday on the way home, she's checking me out, and there was a knot on my head and a bruise here and a cut there that I had gotten from the other inmates while being in prison. I'm saying to myself, my mom is okay with this. She's not mad at all.
Okay.
And we get home, and as I'm walking in the house, she said, hey, once you get inside, drop them. So I turned around and said, ma'am, you heard me, drop them. And by the way, drop them means take off your clothes.
Correct.
And all of your clothing. And when she walked in, had my clothes off, and she came in with a M switch, 3 of them. And she sat on the corner of the bed, and she braided those 3 together and became one. And she beat the hell out of me. I was beaten so bad until that summer of '61, I was unable to go on the outside. Maybe not being unable, I was too embarrassed to go on the outside because that beating that she put on me left marks on my body.
Wow. And so this is you.
That's me.
Why don't we talk a little bit about this and this wall and what this means?
Well, this is me at the age of 13. This is my initial
Good looking.
arrest. Good, the best looking guy up here, of course, of course.
Gotta see that part.
Right. This is my initial arrest at 13.
Okay.
But thereafter, after pleading with my mom to let me join forces with the Freedom Riders, and she finally said yes, which was the next year, my being 14.
Wow.
And that's when everything just opened up to me. And it's we talking 1962, and Emmett Till was murdered, I think, in 1955. And I didn't know anything about it. That's how his death was shielded to the black community
Okay.
by black parents. Black parents did not want their kids to know about Emmett Till. And actually, the white community didn't want us to know either because they thought it might be an uproar. So it was low key, very little media coverage on this. Even national media coverage was real low on the coverage of Emmett Till. And I didn't get a chance to meet his mother, but she had to have been a strong lady, very strong, to open up the casket. And I can recall her making the statement that she wanted the whole world to see what they had done to her son. And that was bravery. To me it was, especially now, after being a grown man and having children and grandchildren. And I don't think I would have wanted the world to see what had happened to them if that had happened in that fashion.
Wow. Mm-hmm. And one of the questions that I need to ask you, and I think there's a lot of people that might be a little bit hesitant, but I think it's an important question for we to understand. If the words Jim Crow is thrown around quite a bit. Limited information that I gathered when I was in school. We didn't talk about it very much. Why don't you explain, if you can, what you think Jim Crow means, and maybe a little bit of the history of that?
Well, Jim Crow started back during slavery time, and it was a way of suppression.
Okay.
It was laws that was enacted, but it was not actually laws that was on a book.
So it wasn't written.
It wasn't written.
Unwritten, spoken.
Right, exactly. And it was a situation whereas you knew about it, and you knew that it was a Jim Crow law, but it was nothing that you could do. It was being made up.
Give us an example of a Jim Crow law.
Give you a good one. When black was able to register, to become registered voters, they came up with this law about they will put beans in a jar, and you had to give the number of beans that's in that jar in order to become registered. And they said that was the law.
You have got to be kidding.
No, seriously. Or they would give you a bar of soap and tell you, we need to know how many bubbles would come from this bar of soap. I give you a can of pennies, and you need to tell me how many pennies are in this bucket. Those were some of the Jim Crow laws. Even property that you might have owned, they would say you didn't own it, and they would come up with a way, or should I say a law, or even a document stating that in so-and-so and so-and-so time, another person owned it, and he or she didn't have the right to convey it over to you.
Right. Based
on whatever, and it stood up in court.
So what this did is, on a national level, segregation was illegal. Am I correct on that? And which amendment was that was passed that made that so that? The problem is that the South didn't respect that.
They didn't respect it at all.
So they came up with their own unwritten law, which is the nickname of it was the Jim
Crow
laws.
law.
And these were the things, how they kept segregation in full force in the South. Wow.
Exactly.
So you have a book, and I started to read the book yesterday. Absolutely great book.
Thank you.
About the next 20 seconds before we close here, tell me a little bit about what inspired you to write the book, and maybe about what the book is about.
Okay, the book is about me, but what it really inspired me, I was in this museum, in this location where I am now.
Okay.
And there was a visitor in here from Texas. And I was talking to a group of kids about civil rights in back to the 60s. And this lady was like next door, and she overheard my conversation. And when I was done with the kids, she walked up and asked, did I have a second? I said, yes. She said, I heard part of your story. You need to put it in print. And I said, well, I thought about it, but I talked to so many individuals, and that the bottom line is I was being messed over.
Right.
And I just said, well, I'll just wait until I'm able to do myself.
Okay.
And she said, my husband owned a publishing company in Texas, and I'll be more than glad to help you, be more than glad to put everything in writing. Just your story need to be told. And I said, okay. And she gave me her card. I gave her my card. And I guess a week or two passed, and I didn't call her, and she didn't call me.
Right.
But after a month passed, she called me and said, I'm not trying to persuade you, but are you still interested? I said, well, yeah, but I really haven't just really thought about it. She said, well, I'll be back in Jackson She was originally from Mississippi,
Right.
and she was here visiting, and she said to be back in Jackson within a week. I'd stop by and see you. And she stopped by, and we had a conversation, about an hour conversation. And the next thing I knew, we was on the phone twice a week, and it took us several months. And then she came back, and we went over some things, some places that things took place, and everything else became history.
And what's the name of the book?
Pushing Forward.
Okay. And if I may be so forward, as I was reading your book, I read the beginning of it, and there was a couple points that you made in order for the book to be printed. And one of the points was that you didn't want the word African American to be used, that you wanted the word black to be used. Mm-hmm. Would you want to explain why that was important to you at that time?
Well, even right now, I prefer to be black, because I am black.
Okay.
We've been given so many names.
Correct.
One day we are colored, the next day we are African American and whatever, but I'm black.
Okay.
And I'm proud.
Okay.
And basically that's it.
I love it. It's absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time. You are going to be one of the highlights of my trip in Mississippi.
Well, I'm glad you think so.
Super nice to meet you.
Appreciate you.
Thank you once again.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks again.